order. Sorry we're late starting. This work session is on the 2011 property tax appraisal report, tax base. So, Mr. Mayor, or who's Marty doing it?
He is.
Marty, I'll turn it over to you, sir. Thank you. And like I told you before, I appreciate not having the little sheet that shows what our taxation are for all the assembly members. Remember all the years past, we come in here and it's been right on here? It's nice that we have to go out and find this, so does Rosemary. So it's nice, she can find it, so can
Well, it's
we.
not rocket science, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So for the
Let's go
record,
around the table and give them to identify themselves. Julia?
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Ernie Hall, Anchorage Assembly.
Paul Holman, Anchorage Assembly.
Elder Green Jackson.
Dick Train Assembly.
Jennifer Johnston.
Marty McGee, Municipal Assessor.
Jerry Wedlick, Deputy Assessor.
Good. Well, Marty, time's yours.
All right, we'll get going.
Debbie, you want to say that Debbie was here?
Yes,
Today-
Debbie's missing in action, but she's around here somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, can I get one of those packets, please?
You didn't grab one when you walked
No,
in?
sir, I apologize.
Today marks the official beginning of the assessment period and process.
Perry Drummond just joined us too.
We will put into the mail today approximately 90,000 of these green cards, which are notice of assessment. And the information is both the identifying the property, ownership and value, and information on the back of the card goes to the property owners about the appeal process and how to contact my office. So more information will come to you about that. All of the values have been made live this morning on the municipal website, so anybody can look up their property value for 2011. This also starts the statutory appeal period. So for the next 30 days, property owners have a statutory right to appeal. They'll have to file an appeal with my office. Information on the website about how to do that, and forms and information is available at my office as
Well, you
well.
still have to pay $100 to appeal it.
There's a
They get
deposit.
it back.
There's a deposit for the appeal, which has to be paid when you file, or it's not a valid appeal. And we have refunded over 90% of those deposits back to property owners in the last process, in the last cycle. So that's a refundable and important point, I guess, for taxpayers and citizens is that they don't have to prevail. The value does not have to change in order to get the deposit back.
They need
It's
to
a
show up.
deposit, so they have to participate, cooperate in the process of reviewing the valuation, and show up to the hearing if there's a hearing. But that's what they have to do to get the deposit back.
So when do they not get it back?
When they don't allow us inspection of the property, provide requested information, or appear at their hearing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'll march through then what we've got prepared for you. We used a puzzle motif here, and so what I envision here is these are pieces of the puzzle of how property tax works and information for you and citizens about that process. At the beginning of this year's presentation, I'm going to present some information on tax policy concepts and issues. I know that there's ongoing debate in the community, and I hope this is helpful, and of course we're available to explain more of this. The concept of buoyancy is a property tax concept. It has to do with the reliability of the income from the tax source. Property tax is the only form of tax which self-adjusts to changes in the economy. So no matter how property values go up or down related to what's going on in the economy, the municipality can find a reliable source of the same amount of tax revenue from that tax base. And the tax base is my job. That's my responsibility to identify and explain the tax base and provide that in this process of taxation. The other parts of the process are the budget, which was recently passed for the municipality and under work for the school district, and setting the tax rate, which is something you folks will do later in the year once the other pieces are known. So I'm giving you information about one of the pieces. We're going to talk about some concepts here, tax capacity and tax effort. I don't have good information to provide you on those, so I'm going to talk about them in general. The reason we don't is we don't have much, these relate income to tax paid. They've been accumulated for states across the United States, so I have some information on that, but not for local communities. So I don't have a good source of information to compare Anchorage to another community right now. We can develop that as time goes on, but it isn't available to me right now. And the other part of that is because it's an income-based measure of relative tax, but we don't have an income tax in Alaska. So we don't have good information about average household income. The census data will be providing us new and better information, but right now I don't have anything but old 1990s information about the relative amount of income per household. And anything I tell you is going to be based on that information right now. And I'm in pretty close contact with State Department of Labor. Neil Freed is the economist working on that. So as he gets information and we develop it, I'm discussing it with him so I can provide you with more information as we go on through the year. So tax capacity and tax effort then takes that concept and moves it one step further, and in a comparison use tax burden we're going to talk about, and that's about who pays the tax and how taxes work, and then tax rates is the mill rate that we discussed. So we'll go through some slides here. I've already explained this buoyancy concept. I've presented to you before this basic little mathematical formula of the assessed value, the mill rate, and the amount of tax revenue. So once we know two parts of that equation, we can determine the other part. Go to the next slide. The tax base for the municipality of Anchorage is all taxable property within the boundaries of the borough. This map shows, and I think you're all aware of, a large part of our borough is exempt from tax. It's owned by the government. It's the state or the federal government and the military. So the remaining portion of real property is the tax base that we use to fund local government. And we also use income or taxes on personal property as well as real property. So I want to talk about that as we go through the presentation. Next slide here shows you the change in the tax base between 2010 and 2011. Now what we've had is some subdivision of property, so the number of tax parcels changing is related to development activity, nothing else. And the total amount of tax value is about the same as it was, and I'm going to give you more and more information as this goes on. What we have is a stable tax base and a pretty stable real estate market in Anchorage, not affected in the same way as the rest of the country. We can explain why. And then the other thing here is, like I was telling you about, is the relative parts of this by value. How much is commercial real estate, how much is residential real estate, and how much is taxable personal property. So this little pie chart, it hasn't changed significantly from prior years, but those are the three main components of our tax base when we talk about property tax in Anchorage. The idea of tax capacity, like I was explaining, is to give a relative measure of the community of how much income is in the community versus how much taxes are levied in the community. And as I explained, I don't have a statistic to give you, but we can work on that as time goes on. It's a useful tool that is used in other states and taxing jurisdictions of measuring the ability to tax and how much available is there to government to run it, to provide services. And tax effort then takes that and makes it a relevant term in terms of average household income. So how much taxes are being levied in comparison to what the income is for the community. This slide is another representation of the tax base. And so it shows the different components of real property and personal property based on value. And one of the truths here that we have to deal with in Anchorage is that over 60% of the tax base is homeowners. So whatever we do in terms of changes to the tax base, providing exemptions or alternative forms of tax, the property tax is predominantly paid by homeowners in Anchorage. And then people tend to focus on specific high-value properties and slices of this pie. And so we get into the commercial real property, and then you can look at a band, for instance, for hotels, and see how much value there is associated with hotels in comparison to the whole tax base. It's not very
I've got a
big.
question for you, sir.
Sure.
I've just been looking at that, and I know that you've gone through sort of reassessment of commercial property in the last 4 or 5 years. Has that ratio changed any as you've reassessed commercial property?
Not a great deal. And what we find, most of the work we've done is that specific individual properties may have changed even significantly depending upon how we address the problem. But in terms of the total tax base and the impact on the total tax base, there hasn't been a big change in terms of the amount of taxable property associated with commercial real estate. One thing we're going to find as we go through this program too is the rate of construction of commercial real estate is down significantly more than the rate of new construction for residential. So it's actually kind of going the opposite direction because residential is growing, the number of properties and the value associated with residential, whereas these commercial slices are not growing.
Thank you, Marty.
Now here's some information on the comparison, and we tried to pick some relative numbers. So like I said, the census data I'm using here, this $88,000 is pretty old, but it's the best estimate I have right now.
Debbie?
How did you get to 51 communities, Marty?
There's a study done by the District of Columbia, which has been done quite a long time, and they selected the 51 communities.
Based on?
They chose the largest community in each state, and including the District of Columbia.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Marty.
So it's the 11th from there's 10 that collect more
Right, that's correct.
per capita? Okay.
Yeah, we're relatively high when you look at property tax as you compare our community to other communities across the United States. But we're almost entirely dependent on property tax. We don't have any other forms of tax.
Unlike the others that use sales tax, some of their states use sales tax and make sure sells
Yes.
property.
Yeah, and they may have other kind of excise taxes as well, so that we don't have.
We have a robust tobacco tax.
Thank you, you voted for it, Mayor. Numerous times. I didn't veto it this time, I appreciated it. Go ahead, Marty.
Okay, so then in order to just give later in the show here, we're going to support this, but the $316,000 is the average value of a single-family home in Anchorage this year. We just use that as a representative sample, and we said, okay, then if the homeowner earns $100,000 in income and they own a home of $316,000, how much taxes do we expect they're going to pay? Now this is an average, so it's not specific to individual tax districts, but it's $4,800 approximately is what they pay. And that's 4.8% of their income, if that's a fair characterization. Now you can do a similar characterization with commercial property taxpayers, looking at the income they earn from rent, what we call effective gross income, and taxes typically represent about 10% of the effective gross income on commercial property. So that gives you some way to measure the difference between the impact of tax, property tax on homeowners and on commercial property owners.
Just say again, Marty, it's roughly 5% or give or take for residential property.
Right.
Commercials is roughly 10%.
Yeah, but looking not at the income of the business that occupies it, but the rent from the property only.
I remember, Marty, when Heather was on the assembly with me, people would come up and complain about the property tax. She'd say, let's say there's 5 in your family, you're getting $1,000 from the PFD. So when you take the $5,000 you're getting from the state, you pay no property tax.
And that's a comment that's often made, and it's accurate in terms of what's going on.
Thank you, Marty. Appreciate it. Yes?
Marty, just so I understand the last, or actually that'd be the third and the fourth bullet there, paragraph. It says national data indicates a homeowner earning $100,000 pays an average of 8.76% of total taxes, which include income, property, sales, and auto. And the one above says it's 4.8%, but that's only property tax.
That's right.
So it's not an apples to apples comparison.
No, it's a way of looking at it and saying, if I lived in a different community, what would I expect to pay in tax, as opposed to I live in Anchorage, and what do I expect to pay
Okay,
in
so
tax?
So it is apples to apples.
It is in one respect, yes.
Well, no,
I mean,
because it's 5% on the top, but that does not include income tax, right?
With this ranking I just gave you of being 15 in terms of property tax, in Anchorage we pay fairly high property tax, but we don't pay other forms of tax. So when you do tax policy and you think about the whole picture of all sources of revenue, you have to take that into consideration. Someplace else you might pay $3,000 in property tax, but at the end of the day you pay almost $9,000 in total taxes.
But does income relate to like a local community then? Are we
Talking state or federal?
Taxes?
Yeah.
State, it's local state tax. local and state
State
tax.
income tax.
Yes.
State, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in many, again, this is part of the complexity of tax policy. In many states, in the typical county-state relationship, a lot of money comes to the county, say to support schools, from the statewide income tax. We have a different kind of
That's
relationship.
the way it is in California, right? The state collects the local
Yes.
government tax, then.
Idaho,
sends it back.
California, and Oregon are like that.
Marty, we've got a question from Harriet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McGee, national data indicates a homeowner in total taxes, income, property, sales, auto. Does that income tax, is that only local and state income tax? That is not federal income tax?
Yes,
in
that's
that
correct.
piece
I'm
right
not
there?
including anything about.
Since everybody pays federal income tax,
Right.
that's out of the equation. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Continue, Marty, I'm sorry, we took you on that little.
That's all right, but that's why we
Nice.
included it, because there's a lot of things to consider as we do this. Okay, so now we'll look at, just briefly here, this is basically the same thing that came out of the budget book, forms of revenue for the general government part of the income picture. And property taxes are expected to produce about 55% of the revenue for the municipality, when we look at that slice of the pie. And so this is how we estimated, and this is an estimated average tax rate. It's not a specific tax rate of any individual, and of course you haven't set the tax rate yet, so the municipality has not determined that. But this is calculated based on what we know about currently about the value of the taxable property and the amount of tax revenue the budget anticipates. And then this is a comparison of historic, where we are with tax rates for the municipality of Anchorage, and where we expect to wind up this year. And then this is another, to address another question we're frequently asked of how this divides up between the school district, which is the other major user of the property tax, and general government. And so this is how we see things coming down this year. So we're about a 51%, 49% split between the two divisions of government. So now we're going to move into the next segment of the information here. And this year, in part of our budget processes, we have these performance value results, standards and measurements of how we do our job and what we're doing. They're not really new because we've been producing a lot of this data for the state assessor, who has the oversight responsibility for property tax and other sections of government for a long time. But anyhow, the sales ratio is the one that we use most associated with accuracy of our valuation. And we're reporting a 94% on that valuation measure. So that's comparing assessed value to what we know to be sale prices, documented sale prices. And that says that we're pretty accurate. We're certainly within the standards by the International Association of Assessing Officers. We look at the cost to do the job. We haven't yet set a benchmark or a goal as to where we're going with that. It's just a fact at this point as to what it costs us per inspection. Now, inspections are part of what we do, and we have a mandate from the state government that once every 6 years we should visit property in order to accurately know the condition of the property and predict its value. We should go by and inspect property at least once every 6 years. We've had trouble meeting that mandate in prior years, and we had a backlog of uninspected property, but this year we've gained a lot of ground. So, and I'll show you a historic pattern on that as we move through the presentation, but this year the target was 16,000, and we actually inspected over 19,000 pieces of real estate. Now, when we talk to individual property owners and they say, gee, you said that the average increase in value was 1% this year, but mine went up 6%. Why is that? Almost always the answer is associated with these inspections, because we went out, we looked at the property, and we changed something about the description of the physical property. And then when my staff interacts with them, then we have a discussion about whether that's an accurate picture. So did we get the measurement right? Did we understand the condition of the property? Did we know about the level of completion of a partially complete section of the property, additions, deletions, and all the things that happen to change property value? That's the general discussion we have, and that leads to almost over 90%, most of the adjustments to assessed value that happened in this 30-day period. Yes, sir.
Elby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How close are we with assessing at the market value for commercial property?
Well, I'm going to have a specific piece of data for you when I get to the commercial section, but
Okay,
we're in the
look through
90%.
here before I ask the question, I guess
The challenging part of that is that there are not very many sales. And the sales that have occurred, there's a story behind each one of them. There's something to do with the motivation of the buyer and seller, whether the property was leased and so forth. So even though I'll give you a piece of information which is calculated based on what I know, it's really hard to prove that, to be confident that that's accurate. So that's the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we also looked at different measures, the cost per appeal, the number of appeal responses we've done by June 1st, which became a legal mandate. We're doing very well at that. I think the cost per appeal is fairly reasonable. The cost, this data collection part is keeping accurate on not only the description of the property, but the title to the property, any changes in platting. All those things are recorded and kept in my data system and shared with the other municipal agencies. So this is information about how we do our job and how much it costs to do it.
Debbie has a question for you, sir.
I just want to commend you on the public education. A member of Mary Ann Burke came to us and talked about that being a specific goal that she's working with you jointly.
Right.
And it was an issue from the Ombudsman's office too. So I commend you on that. Do you know if the board has gone out to various community councils and done it, or is that your staff that's done it?
It's going to be my staff, and I've made, just sent something to the Federation of Community Councils, an announcement that I'm available to come to anybody's meeting, and I intend to go to the meeting on Wednesday night for all the Federation, or all the council heads, and explain that to them. So we haven't got appointments, or very few yet, but I expect we will.
I'm going to try to get you out to Eagle River, Barney.
Good.
Appreciate it.
So I just was informed or reminded that the BOE has met with 2 groups of realtors outside.
Oh, good.
So the BOE is doing part of this too, and I know
hope
they're making
they
some
have.
effort.
Yeah.
And any group that you folks are involved with or want me to come and talk to, Chamber of Commerce or whatever, I've gone to a lot of Rotary meetings and Lions Club meetings and stuff. We're available to do that.
Good deal.
Paul?
And on that, I know, I have been to NARC, and I actually saw the 2 of you guys actually did a presentation, very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
Okay, I told you there'd be more information about what we're doing with inspections of property, and here it is. And you can see the tall yellow lines here, the lighter colored lines, are what the mandate has been in terms of what we should have been inspecting. And the shorter green lines, dark green lines, are what we were actually able to do. Fortunately, we've been able to really step that up in the past 2 years. And we're pretty much caught up with the backlog in terms of uninspected property.
Jennifer's got a question.
Yes.
Has it helped to have the software? I mean, to have the computers, or is it just actually getting out there and doing it?
Well, we're going to talk about, we're about to issue an RFP for a new computer system. We're operating basically the same software we always did since 1986 right now. We don't have the capability for in-field data entry. So we have to go measure a house, write down notes, and come back to the office to enter it. We've attempted a couple of different experiments with doing that with the existing software, and it hasn't been very successful. So
See,
we have.
I thought you'd put it down that.
No, I've been experimenting with some things, but I haven't been able to pull it off with what we've got right now.
Paul has a question. Paul?
2 things. Going back just a slide or so, the cost per appeal, and I'm sorry, it got past me, I looked at it and went in. The 2120 figure, is that mostly time, staff time that costs the municipal department to do the appeal, or is that something that has to be paid by the person who appeals?
No, that's staff time to do it.
That was easy. And then the second one, on these, I'm looking at the graph and the difference of, particularly 2003 when it was way down at 4,100. Is that due to lack of staff or just?
Well, actually, in 2003, we were underwater with the appeal process.
I've changed the appeal process.
The appeal process was taking half of our budgeted resource, and now it's taken a fraction, a tenth of our total budgeted resource, something like that. So the change to the code and the appeal process accounts for part of it. And then there's other things too going on. When we have a really active real estate market with a lot of sales happening, value changing rapidly, a lot of new construction going on, we had to spend a lot more time in the field inspecting and collecting data and analyzing it. This year, with a quiet real estate market and not as much construction, we've been able to dedicate almost a whole lot more resource anyhow to the task of inspecting property. So that's what we've used, what we've got.
Some people may not like that, but that's.
Well, I'm sure they won't,
to
you
it.
know, that's the important thing for us all to know in the community, because you know, when we make these statements about the average change, that doesn't mean that's the change to your property. And it doesn't mean that your property is wrong, but we're here to explain why your value changed more than the average, or less, whatever the effect is.
Well, Marty, you're right. In 2003, I think Debbie was here and the mayor was here, we changed the system on appeals, because before, they didn't have to pay anything, so people would just come in and file an appeal
Right.
off the wall. We had more than you could possibly ever handle.
We've had approximately 3,000 appeals a year, and it was taking us almost 3 years to work through that process. And so the property owners, not only were a lot of people filing appeals, but they weren't coming to the hearings either, or they weren't providing any information. So that's the change, is to say, you have to have a reason for your appeal, and you have to cooperate in the process, and that has brought it down to about 700 appeals a year, which we are able to process in a timely manner.
And I thank you, Marty.
Now this cartoon's in here because it's a funny cartoon, but it also gives me a chance to talk about a couple of things. One of them is that the values that we set are not arbitrarily set. They're based on mathematical formulas, statistical analysis, and that's how we get uniformity and equity in terms of how people, but it's not easy to explain to people how we did that. So that's part of the challenge. And the other is that we're about to embark on getting a new camera system. And when we do that, a lot of this complicated internal math changes. So one of our big challenges will be producing values which we hope to be pretty close to what they were in the prior year. But anytime we shift to a new system, value change is an outcome of that. And it isn't necessarily just because the market changed. It's possibly because the way the value was calculated and the weight placed on different attributes of the property is different in a new system. So that's part of our challenge with a new computer system. But that's a process we're just about on the verge of embarking on, and it's a big deal. So now we'll get into the specifics of different segments of the property and the value change for this year. And so this gives you information about how many residential properties, how many commercial properties, and what the overall effect of the value change is. And we're going to talk in detail then on the residential and the commercial parts. And one of the things about this is the change to the tax base that we're talking about in the top part of this slide. And in the bottom part, the amount of new construction associated with residential has caused more value to be there for taxation of residential property and less value to be there for commercial property. So that's part of the explanation for the change. It isn't all just the market value changed, it's the number of properties to be appraised. So, overall, we have a 1% positive change in value in residential property. What the market data is telling us and what recent public speakers have been saying is that the value is holding up. The number of transactions are not there. The number of sales has gone down from prior years. But you can sell property and you can achieve value similar to, if not better than you did a year ago for the property, typically. So, and then we track each little market segment individually. So the overall change is one thing, specific individuals. Now when we say vacant land going down 3%, it doesn't mean the value of a vacant lot went down 3%. Because the property is being developed, there's less vacant land there in that segment, and that's what this negative 3% really represents. And there is commercial or residential development ongoing, new subdivisions, new condominium projects. new houses, new apartment buildings being built. We track the number of listings. We pay a lot of attention to listings. We have for the last several years. So this is information about how many we have in our system and what the ratio of the assessed value to the list price is. And we expect this ratio to be lower than the sale ratio because people tend to list property high and the actual sale transaction occurs somewhere lower than the original listed price. So that's good news. That's telling us we're accurate and we're following the market. The sales, similar story. We know how many sales occurred because of recorded deed transactions. We're able to document a certain number of those sales where we know it's reported to us what the sale price is. That's what we use in our modeling and as the basis for evaluation is what we know to the sale price to be. We're about 1/3 of the total number of sales that occurred, and that's pretty typical for us in this non-disclosure environment, what we've dealt with year after year. So it isn't different than other years. And based on what we know about the confirmed sales, we're at 96%, which is where we want to be. And I'll get you just a second, Paul, but the average here, we're talking about the mean line when we talk about 96%. So we know a certain number of sales, the assessed value is higher than the sale price, and a certain number is lower than the sale price. So if we were at 1, we'd be overvaluing a significant part of the known sales. We don't want to be there. But close to 1 is where we want to be. Yes, sir.
Well, what would it take, or would it be helpful, I guess, two-part question, would it be helpful to have mandatory disclosure of sales and the value? And what would it take? Would it take state law change or municipal law change?
It certainly would be helpful from my point of view, and I believe it would improve the fairness and the accuracy of the assessments to have disclosure. And most other states in the union have disclosure, if some won't. So I think that's all true, and I don't think it harms the real estate market, and it doesn't impinge on the ability of realtors to do business or collect money. I disagree with those conclusions. What does it take? In most other states, the key element for enforcement of that is that title is recorded at the county level. So unless a disclosure is made, they won't allow people to record title on a change of ownership. In Alaska, title is recorded at the state level. So local governments have no leverage to say you can't record title. So that we worked on this a few years ago quite a bit, trying to find some compromise way that an element of disclosure could come in. We can enact laws locally that require it. Enforcing it is a problem. How we enforce it, what kind of pain we cause somebody that doesn't comply with the disclosure is a challenge.
Well, just as a side note, would you please bring back cat licensing before you do this?
Okay.
Or fluoridation.
Yes, that too. We've sat through this before, and
I know.
believe me, you do not want to go there. Debbie can tell you, and so can the mayor. We've been through this before.
Now, one alternative kind of tax is a transaction tax every time a piece of property sells, which is another thing that's available to us locally, and it brings forth an element of disclosure. So that's another way to try to get at the issue from two different directions. One is diversification of our revenue base, and the other is more accurate information to use in assessment.
And I was looking into transaction tax, and again, it's an enforcement issue.
Yes. So here's some information, and fortunately you guys have a printed copy of this. This is the way we break down residential property in terms of little slivers of separate market areas. And so when we gave you the information that a 1% change was the average for all residential, you can go down this list of individual types of property and see that for custom homes it's a -2%, and for the mid-range multi-residential condo it's a -4%, and for, let's see if I got a +3 for triplexes and duplexes. So the average is not the reality the individual will see, and it's not an accurate statement with regard to what's going on with different segments of the market. This is all based on what we know to be documented sales. So we believe that there is a healthy and active market, for instance, in duplexes and triplexes, and that value has increased at a rate on them faster than it has on other types of properties. That's what this is telling you.
Harriet Drummond and then Jennifer Johnston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marty, the average home value, is that an average of all of these
Yes.
residential types on the market
In
clusters
general, the
page?
answer is yes.
Okay, so that 316.6 average that you came up with for this year is based on this, on the valuation of all these different types of residential?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Everything that we included in the, we said include single-family patio homes and zero lot lines, so 316 is all of those types. Fourplexes are not included.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the
Jennifer
line-
and then Debbie, and what's a patio home?
It's something like a townhouse, a row of common wall properties, and they have a little garden area. It used to exist in, and the reason we use that label is it used to exist in our zoning ordinances of that, and we've just retained that label. And I think it was eliminated from the zoning portion of
Usually
it.
like 3,000 square
Yeah.
foot lots, and so they patio,
It's like the Strawberries, that subdivision up in Minnesota.
Yeah, those are condominiums, the way they did those. That's even a different creature, but something like that, yes.
I know, we've heard a lot about that over the years.
And something like zero lot lines, but those are all duplexes, so.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair?
we've got, if you're done, Harry, we got
Wait.
Jennifer.
Actually, I'm not.
I'm sorry, Harry, go ahead.
Does that average 316,000 include condominiums?
No.
Okay, so which of these property types are included to get you to the $316,000 average assessed value?
with single family and patio homes.
It says right at the top, there's single family patio, zero lot line.
It's on the top there, Harriet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right under the label.
Patio and zero.
Okay.
Now, if you want to look into this in greater detail, we can work with you and provide you any of the information that supports these numbers and where they come from, so that's not a problem.
Do you have an average valuation for condominiums?
I want to say it's around 195, 195.
195? Okay, roughly, okay.
Yeah, you can see when we do these clusters, we have several different types of condominiums. And so
Right.
we can, of course, aggregate them together, but, a certain type, like these site condos that we have, tend to be more in the character of houses. And other types, like the traditional apartment-style condominiums, are not, and so they don't appeal to the same buyer. The buyer of one wouldn't be considering the other.
That's all, Harriet?
Yes, thank you.
Jennifer and then Debbie?
With your assessments, you always break it up between land and building, and I don't see any land in this. Or is there a way of segregating out the land assessment?
Well, yeah, we have separate models for land, for the valuation of lots. We provided you a little bit of information on the average change in land, but we have specific information I could give you on different types of lots, zoning, size, location, for different areas. Yeah, this is total value change.
Right, and I understand, but
Yeah.
I find it helpful, I mean, I know.
Because
our land
it
valuation
will be true
has
this year that
increased.
some places, the land value will change at a different rate than the total
Right.
value or the improvement portion. So,
Something I've personally seen, so I just.
sure, and we have to explain why every year to people, and the reason why is what we observe of market activity. So if we know that lot sales have occurred and they're higher than what we had included in prior years, we increase the value of those lots to some degree, because we've done a lot of work in reviewing our description of the individual lots. So there are certain areas of town where we have changed, for instance, the view attribute, which contributes a lot to value, and either taken a view attribute away or added it on, and that'll cause a big value change for that individual property owner. And that's all based on review and inspection. That's what's been going on for the past 2 years.
Thank you, Marty. Debbie?
I have two questions. First one is, in the Title 21 rewrite, we're considering putting different standards for industrial property in terms of what's allowed and what's not. So it'd be of some interest to know if the total value of industrial property is increasing or decreasing. Part of the argument for the restrictions is the scarcity and the value is increasing.
Right.
But validation of that would be helpful for proving it false. The other thing that I am confused about is these clusters. It appears that different neighborhoods, you've clustered by some specific neighborhoods, Is it because in general, those neighborhoods have a different value than other neighborhoods?
The intent here is that we view the market from the perspective of a buyer.
Okay.
So when you're considering buying a home, we try to include stuff that would be other substitute property. So in general, if you're wanting to buy a home and you would consider the southwest portion of the community, which we've characterized as Sand Lake predominantly. So the market area is intended to include everything in that. And then we break that down in these, also in these clusters, there's a breakdown between, for instance, the older homes and the brand new ones, and the homes that are high, custom designed, high value homes, as opposed to your typical tract home.
So you'd look at houses differently if they're in Mountain View versus in Sound Lake?
Yeah.
We look at the sales that are in that area, and it helps us see what the people are paying for houses in those areas.
So we use sales from that area to predict the value of homes in that area of town.
Okay, have you reviewed those clusters recently?
Yes.
Because, okay.
And we do it annually, so there,
I know
I'll
that
back up, I don't think there have there been any changes in cluster boundaries this year? Okay. We've been reviewing it though, because we've been considering whether these are appropriate, need to be changed or not, and what the effect of the change is.
Okay, because for me, I would think that, say, Eagle River is different from Chudiak. I don't know. You know, so I don't know how you define them, that's all.
There is a way we do it, inside our modeling, because there's another level, even below the cluster, called market neighborhood,
Oh, so
which
you've got
further,
subsets in
yes,
Oh, okay.
which further subdivides it.
Yeah, and so, like, you'll notice when you look at the comps, most of the sales will be in the Chudiak area for Chudiak properties.
Okay.
And Eagle River, they'll be right close.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. And the I question, maybe you could give me later somehow?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Chris?
Yeah, I just was curious, out of that $31.8 billion in total tax base, what's the land component? I mean, is that a quarter, or a sixth, or a third, or?
It's approximately in the 30% range.
30%, yeah. So, yeah.
There's kind of, this is just a rule of thumb, but there's kind of a rule of thumb on improved property that the land component contributes about 25 to 30% of the total property value.
Thank you, Marty. Sorry to take you so long.
That's all right.
We've got 15
Good
minutes
discussion,
left.
so I'll try to,
We just don't get to talk to you that often.
yeah. Okay, so this is average value again. And then we compare this. Now the important thing here is these are very different statistics. The MLS average sale price and the average assessed value. And you can think about just the math involved, and that's one reason we showed you the number of properties involved. Because what MLS sells in a year is about 1,000, 2,000 pieces of property. And that slice of the whole tax base is different every year. One year they may sell a lot of condominiums or starter homes, another year they sell a lot of high-value homes. So it is not an apples-to-apples comparison to say, how does the assessed value stack up against the MLS average sale price? But it's useful to review and consider is whether we're in the ballpark and whether there's a relationship between the two, because there should be. And I think the relationship is pretty close and indicates that we're not too far off in our assessment. Now this is more specific than the prior statistic we provided as to the average value of a single-family home. So, and the rate of change from the prior year. So that's just another statistic, and we've historically provided that, so if anybody's keeping tally or wants to see it over the past several years, we can do that. Now we'll go on to commercial property. We're following both listings and sales. The big story in commercial property is that there's not a lot of transactions going on. It's currently very difficult to sell and to finance commercial property. So unless somebody's really motivated to buy or sell a piece of property, transactions aren't happening. When you look around at the different segments of the property, and we'll talk about them, it's relatively full, it's generating rent. There are tenants in most types of property. There's a story or one or two in each different segment as to what's going on. But there's not a lot of market data to indicate a change in value. And so that's what we're reflecting. We don't have a lot of foreclosures. And we have very little new construction going on. Basically, the new construction that's going on is people that have to build something, not that people are speculating on expansion for some reason. We include fourplexes in this group, and we include multifamily houses of more than 4 units. So 2 categories are included there. Now, part of what's going on here, too, is we pay a lot of attention, like investors do, to the income approach, the amount of rent that you can earn off of this type of property. And even though the property is full in multifamily and the rents are stable, the operating expenses have gone up. So it's caused the value, transaction price of the property to go down a little bit. And we don't have very much new construction of multifamily housing, none that's not a not-for-profit.
Mr. Chair.
Harriet?
Yeah, just an observation. I had a chance to talk with somebody who'd been a homeowner here for a long time, who intends to stay here. They sold their home recently in like 4 days. Then they had the worst trouble finding an apartment to rent temporarily while they looked for a new house. People are apparently stuck in their apartments because of the financing, the unavailability of financing. And this person had to go through an entire credit check in order to rent an apartment, even though he'd been a homeowner for 25 years.
We have a real tightening of that market and a shortage of housing, but we haven't seen rents go up very much, which is also kind of perplexing to say, if it's such a big demand for this type, why can't they increase rent?
Well, nobody's moving, so unless they move, why
Well,
would they
the
raise the rent?
landlord theoretically could increase his rent and seek a tenant who will pay a higher rent on a private property. One of the problems is that all real estate value is tied directly to income, to people's individual income. And individual incomes haven't shifted. So people don't have the ability to pay more for rent. So it is creating a real dynamic in the community where there's a shortage of rental housing. They can't increase the rents, and their operating expenses are going up. So, you know, something's got to give at some point, but right now, it's kind of a critical thing going on. And I agree with everything you said in your observation. Retail, we see no value change. There's obviously some stories of individual retail properties that are suffering, but most retail property is occupied, is earning rent, but it hasn't increased. And if anything, their operating expenses have gone up. And we have a little bit of expansion in retail with new buildings being built. Office buildings is often characterized as 2 or 3 different stories for office buildings. The brand new office buildings that are vacant are having a hard time finding tenants. The older existing office buildings are almost entirely occupied, but the rents have not shifted very much. So again, they're not able to get higher rents as the leases are renegotiated and renewed. So it's an interesting little story, but a lot of that is driven by the national real estate market, the fact that investors and banks are not willing to finance new stuff, and that the corporate tenants in these buildings are not expanding. Typically across the country they're contracting, they're not expanding. So as the recovery from the recession goes on, things will change, but that's the way we see things looking at what's happened in 2010. The hotel market, we have an increase in the gross revenue, and we have an increase in the hotel bed tax. Certain types of hotels have done very well, but there has also been an increase in operating expenses. And in the national market, which is what drives the financing of sales, there is almost no sales activity going on across the United States for hotels. Only the really high-value flag hotels have sold at all, and very difficult to secure financing to do a sale. So even if one of the dilemmas that's been talked about in the Wall Street Journal a lot with commercial properties, even if you sell your property, what do you do with your money then? Because you can't reinvest it in another piece of property, and you can't earn a very high rent in alternative investments. So what motivates you to sell it? So there's not much sales activity going on in any of these categories. Industrial is growing a little bit, and it's almost all fueled by owner-occupants. It's not people seeking rent. It's people saying, my business needs a bigger place, and the only place I can get it is by building a new one or buying one.
Is there a question, Debbie?
No, that helped.
So there's shift, and then you're talking about the I-1 land thing, and that's an interesting dynamic with all of this, especially with the anticipation of some changes to the rules on what you can do with it and how it's developed. Business personal property. We have an increase from the prior year in the total amount of value associated with this is inventory and equipment. It also includes mobile homes, but I'm going to talk about inventory and equipment mostly. We've had some big retailers come into the community, so that big influx of new inventory causes the value to go up. We have had some expansion in some other areas like healthcare too, and so we have some expansion in terms of taxable business personal property. This slide shows you the difference between the mobile home component, which is pretty stable, and the business component. And one thing about the mobile homes is that we have a really aging inventory of mobile homes. They're extremely old compared to other parts of the United States. Yet they still are sold, they're fixed up, they're renewed, and they continue to be occupied. So the value is relatively stable. It's a really hard thing to try to track in terms of market value because it's not real rational. There's not enough value there that people spend a lot of time comparison shopping and figuring out what stuff's worth when they make purchases. The only thing that's really important about this is that we instituted this $20,000 exemption on personal property, which is a good thing, I think, all the way around. And it shows that we really have not, the amount of work we have to do to get the tax revenue has been reduced significantly by that. The tax revenue we get from business personal property has not been reduced. And so it's been a good win-win both ways for the community.
Paul?
There's been some talk, particularly I think from Fairbanks, if I'm not mistaken, to put either a $50,000 or $100,000 tax exemption.
We can, the business personal property can be done by local options. You can change that part of the tax any way you want to. It's possible that increasing this exemption is a good thing, logical thing to do. We've done some analysis of that. But we did a lot of work on it when we set it at 20 and thought that was the optimal level at that point. So the community's changed a little bit though, and so maybe it's worth revisiting. But I don't see
Marty,
any...
the one Fairbanks is talking about was the residential property tax.
Yeah, I was going to go to that. So for us, changing the amount of exemption on business personal property is something to consider, but I don't expect wouldn't anticipate a big shift either in the reduction of cost or the increase in revenue from that. But yes, the mayor is exactly correct. The proposed legislation, the pre-introduced bills, both have to do with the residential exemption and moving it from $20,000 to $50,000 or $100,000. Two bills are in the legislature now to do that, and one of them would actually expand the definition of residential property. So both of them, will run their course and be considered, and we can talk about that as it goes along. But no bill, to my knowledge, doesn't require any action from the state government to change the business.
The snapshot is that if either of those bills were passed, to say 50,000 as opposed to 20, the values would have to stay the same to meet the requirements of the city, but that burden would shift to even the non-exempt property.
Anytime we increase an exemption of any kind, that kind of shift goes on. So it says I'm going to lighten the burden or try to lighten the burden on the residential property owners, increase it on commercial. Now that's the important part of the first part of this presentation there is the story in Anchorage is we don't have anybody else to shift it to. Fairbanks, Valdez, and the North Slope Borough have somebody else, another taxpayer, a big taxpayer, to shift tax burden to, but in Anchorage we don't. We don't have an industrial base, we don't have a manufacturing base, so it doesn't work the way in this, we've had a couple work sessions on this, it doesn't necessarily work the way you anticipate, because all property has to be taxed at the same tax rate for Alaska law. So that increasing tax rate to make up for the exemption takes most of the benefit away from the residential property owners.
It really has an effect, and Marty explained it a couple of years ago really well, that lower income properties actually get the least benefit from it, and it's counterintuitive. And then, of course, the properties that are not considered residential, like the apartments, they get an increase, and of course, who rents apartments but your lowest socioeconomic group generally,
Right.
And so they might see rent pressure going up as costs go up. So it really has a counterintuitive effect.
So even in the proposed legislation where it says you could define multifamily residential as residential, the benefit goes to the owner, not the tenant.
That'll be a question, we're about done, Marty.
Well, when he's done, just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess I'm just about to my last slide, so we're on time. This card I wanted to mention, and exemptions I wanted to bring up. Local law was changed last year, and now we have a mandate that we do an annual recertification. We're sending out notice to the owners of the exempt property. These cards will go out to 384 individual owners of property, reminding them that they have until March 15th to file on this annual recertification for exemption. And so they have to respond to us. They have to give us the information back, or they will lose their exemption. So that's part of our effort to inform them and help them comply with the new law.
That's all exemptions, not just residential?
Yeah, it's all of the mandatory exemptions. The residential and the senior citizen exemptions are not affected by this.
No. May I
Just the
clarify?
ones totally exempt.
May I clarify, if you don't mind? The notices are going out to the mandatory exemptions, and what I mean by that is the churches, the charitable organizations, cemeteries, schools, those kinds of exemptions. We do not have a requirement for senior citizens to reapply, nor do we have an exemption requirement or requirement for residential owners to reapply. This is just part of our ongoing monitoring process of organizations such as the Catholic Church or Alaska Pacific University or those exempt entities to report to us what the use of the property is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quick, first off, I want to thank you and Marty for this presentation. And I also want to thank you for working with me when I brought that ordinance forward to make sure that it was right before the Assembly had the opportunity to vote for it, and I'm glad it's on the books now. And during that conversation, we also talked a little bit about the senior citizens, property tax exemption, and the disabled veterans, and a better way to let folks know in this community. I realize, like everybody else does, that it's an unfunded mandate, but it's still property tax relief for some of the citizens within our community, and some of them don't know about it. So are you still working on ways to get the word out? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we don't have a specific plan to do an advertising campaign, but definitely part of my going out and talking to different elements of the community is to inform them of the program and how it works.
Well, we're done with this work
Thank you.
session. Thank you, Marty. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and your staff.
Thank you.
Next work session starts in about 3 minutes. For Assembly members, just move in the back. I can go get some food. We'll start.